Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Tailosive Tech Live on YouTube. We don't have too much time, ladies and gentlemen. Potentially like 12 hours to go until these announcements are made, but they're kind of last second. They're kind of last minute. I've basically seen 6 different accounts at this point, all claiming they have sources telling them the same things. And I guess that's increasing the likelihood. We seem to have about 30, 40 people, more and more people voting on the poll. Make sure you vote what you think is most likely, because either this stream is going to age pretty well, or it's going to age terribly based on what goes on tomorrow. But yeah, I saw 9 to 5 Macs say they have sources telling them Apple wants to release new Macs. Most of them are all just collaborating in agreement that there will be a new 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pro and a new Mac Mini that drops tomorrow morning, right? Because it's Martin Luther King Jr. Day today, so Apple doesn't want to do a press release on this at the same time. But Mac Rumors is also getting that same source. Max Tech is hearing those same sources claim the same thing. Front Page Tech has also been told by their sources. So, it's one thing when you hear one person kind of write off one argument or hear off one source, but when all of them are claiming the same thing, it starts to feel a little bit either at least coordinated. Thank you, Caleb, for signing up for Tailosive Tech Plus. I appreciate that. And hey, Benji, good to see you. I think Max Tech's rumor might ended up being right. I wonder, what I'm debating is, like, could this be the same source talking to all the same people, right? So, like, there's always the chance that we could have another Apple Watch Series 7 situation where you have one source that was clearly wrong and clearly making stuff up that's contacting everybody at the same time just to throw us all a new one. Because I should admit that, yes, like, okay, lots of different notable news sources are all reporting on the same thing, claiming, yep, Tuesday, January 17th, this is when new Macs are dropping, new MacBooks, new Mac Mini. But I do have to take a step back and also say, hey, it's January, right? And it's also still the Lunar New Year, which is kind of a big celebration for a lot of China, which I've seen some people like Shrimp Apple Pro saying the new Mac press release overlapping with the Lunar New Year feels like kind of competing in the marketing space. Apple very rarely drops new Macs in January. And also on top of that, like some people said in the chat earlier, who was that? Oh, this is covering it up. The poll's covering it up. Bibasic7? Sorry if I'm mispronouncing you, but you said the M2 Pro / Max seems like a pretty big deal. They wouldn't do a press release for it. So that's another good point, is that if this ends up being true, shouldn't the M2 Pro and M2 Max end up being, like, basically the fastest Apple silicon yet? Like, this is the best their chips have ever been. And Apple had, they unveiled the M2 chip at DubDub. So why then would they decide not to have an event for the launch of the M2 Pro and M2 Max? Well, I guess that's where I kind of take a step back. So if you're wondering what I voted for, I haven't decided yet. We actually did a channel member poll in the community earlier today where I just polled the channel members. People signed up for Tailosive Tech Plus. I was like, do you think there will be a launch tomorrow? Because I really don't know who to believe at this point. It sounds like there's a lot of reliable data and a lot of reliable sources all collaborating together saying, yes, I also agree there will be a launch tomorrow. But also, it's just weird that there would be a site refresh for, the fastest chip and also in January. I feel like Apple, of all companies, would want to save that for their spring event at least. We typically don't get site refreshes in January. I can't recall one ever happening in all of my years of covering tech content, or at least hardware launches. Going to see a 49mm regular Apple Watch. It would be interesting, but just remember all your old watch bands wouldn't work. Are there rumors for anything other than MacBooks and Mac Minis? Not really. Pretty much all of the ones I've read are all just pointing to 3 Macs. 14-inch MacBook Pro, 16-inch MacBook Pro, and Mac Mini. I haven't seen anyone claim that we're going to get a new 24-inch iMac, which I kind of find funny. Imagine if everything got refreshed with the M2 chip except for the 24-inch iMac, and they just kind of leave that sitting around. They don't replace that with anything. They don't offer a higher end version, but maybe that says something about the sales of the ugliest iMac of all time. From my view, the iMac G4 is the only Mac I knew that released on January. Yeah, but yes, I know that in the past Apple has done January releases, but most of them were when Steve Jobs was alive. Come on, like that was over 10 years ago. The people in charge of Apple marketing are totally different now. So yes, I know that it's not like completely unheard of, but it's definitely rare in more recent history. Um, iMac Pro would be dope. Spring would be too late and close to M3. Uh, that's an interesting thought process, eUploads. Like they want to get the M2 Pro and M2 Max chips out now because they have to announce M3 chips by the summer. And if they wait and they have an event where they announce here's the M3 chip and here's the M2 Pro, that's just going to get too confusing. Yeah. There might be some truth to that. That almost sounds believable to me. But that what I was kind of turning into before. Yeah, it's going to be the return of Macworld. Yeah, why don't we have Macworld anymore? I think Apple wisely realized, like in case you weren't aware, like why Apple doesn't tend to release that many things in January and February is that's when consumer spending is actually the lowest. Well, we know for a fact that's when advertiser spending is definitely the lowest. But there tends to be a very natural pullback of spending after the holiday season. There's a ton of money spent on the Black Friday sales after Thanksgiving, and then tons on the holidays, preparing for gifts, buying presents for people leading up to Christmas. Then there's the holiday return period. So once you're done at the end of the year, in January comes around, that's when there's usually a lot of people returning products they didn't actually want or trying to sell. There's usually not that much spending consumer-wise in January, which is why even though the original iPhone was unveiled in January, you notice that Apple very smartly decided, you know what, let's not release new iPhones in January anymore because we can capture a lot more of the market and have a lot of people feel like they're buying a new latest and greatest tech product by the holiday season if we launch this by September. And that's what kind of made September the official iPhone season. And even with 2020 and COVID and stuff, they pushed it back a little bit to October, but the following year they went straight back to September again. So that's what they target. People are paying off credit card purchases made during the holidays. Yeah, I didn't think of it that way, Kevin, but that's a really good point. Bring back Macworld, but in November. I agree. That would be kind of cool. This amazing iPhone 14 Pro was $1,000 yesterday. Today it is $1,200. Wow, how beautiful. We will probably get a new iPhone color in April and May. I definitely think it's too early for a new iPhone color, but if Apple's doing a Mac release in January, they're trying all kinds of new weird things at this point, you know? Like, I do think about how rare it was for Apple to do site refreshes until 2019, and then all of a sudden they were dropping AirPods and iMacs and Mac Minis. Was it Mac Minis? No, it was iPads and iMacs and AirPods. All were site refreshes before the March event. And the March 2019 event, which in my opinion is the worst Apple event of all time, was purely just services. They talked about Apple News Plus, they talked about Apple Card, they talked about Apple TV Plus and Apple Arcade. And it was literally just it was for one, a very long event, but it was also a very cringy event because it was mostly just like actors and, you know, Sesame Street characters that go up on stage in front of a crowd of adults trying to get them excited to sign up for Apple TV Plus. And while over time I thought Apple TV Plus became a much better deal, at the time of announcing it, it did not seem like there was like 6 shows that they were announcing. And yeah, they didn't really go into the pricing of it either. So it wasn't a very informative event. It wasn't a very entertaining event. And we all wanted there to be hardware and there was none. So why January? I guess my best bet is just that they want to get these Macs out and they weren't, for some reason, they weren't ready last year. They needed a little bit more time to get production going, but that event was super bad. That's probably like I'm not dissing Big Bird. I love Big Bird. Big Bird was probably the best part of that event, but I am dissing all of the baseless, like, actors just come out on stage and without any trailers just try to tell you why you should watch Apple TV Plus. And it's like, okay, like we'll wait till the show comes out and if it's good, maybe we'll watch it or, you know, I'll use the free trial. But when they announced Apple TV Plus, they didn't tell anybody that we were going to get a year for free or people like me were going to end up getting 2 years for free. They didn't tell us how much it cost. They didn't say $5 a month. They didn't say $10 a month. They didn't say anything. All they just said is that we are going to make movies and TV shows and you should watch them. That was it. They spent like an hour of the event with random actors coming out on stage saying, "Hey, you should sign up for the service that doesn't exist." It was such a waste of time. I hated that event. Too much Oprah, not enough Tim Cook. Well, all Apple events don't have enough Tim Cook. I hope the M2 Max somehow has massive GPU improvements, so when I have the funds for a new Mac, I don't need to get a PC. My prediction that kind of ties into what we were talking about earlier, like people are saying, why January of all times to launch? Apple rarely launches hardware in January. Is maybe the refresh of the similar to how the in October we got the iPad refresh, but there was no event, even though for a lot of the year that people were telling us to expect an event. They weren't that good. The M2 iPad Pro was pretty lackluster, pretty disappointing. Same sort of situation with the iPad 10. It was weird, it was awkward. The Apple Pencil 1 connectivity with a USB-C device and the price hike of $450. It's just weird. So they didn't really feel confident to have an event about it. They kind of wanted to rip off the Band-Aid, like, okay, we need to announce this. We need to update our product lineup, but we don't feel very good about it, so we're just going to kind of drop them. That's part of the reason I think they did AirPods Max the way they did. You know, like AirPods Max, I've never been more torn on an Apple product than that, because I think that it's one of those Apple products that went so good and so hard in certain regions. Like the build quality is amazing, the sound quality is amazing, and they actually were surprisingly like modular, which was amazing. And the just incredible noise cancellation, incredible transparency mode, but simultaneously terrible pricing, terrible plug input and output, terrible case design. And that's why I've never been so torn on an Apple product before. It's like you went so good and also so bad simultaneously. But the weirdest thing about the launch of AirPods Max back when that came out was it was like, I feel like it was later in November, early December. I forget the exact date. I'm sure someone will correct me in the chat. But it was just like a couple weeks after the November Apple event. They had a bunch of events in 2020. And in November, they just had a whole entire event designated to the M1 chip. They announced Apple Silicon. Here's the M1 MacBook Air. Here's the new MacBook Pro. Here's the what was the other one? M1 Mac Mini, which is still on the website. They haven't updated it. And they announced all these Macs, and it was one of the shortest Apple events I ever remember watching, because it was done in like 45 minutes. Didn't even make it to the full hour, which in all my years of watching Apple keynotes, they were always at bare minimum an hour. An hour was like the shortest they ever got. Most of the time they were longer, usually 75 to 90 minutes, and then occasionally you get your March events, which are like 2.5 hours. Or dubs. If they're really packed full of software and hardware announcements, they'll be like 2.5 hours. Okay, it was December 8th. Thank you, Tech God. Just such a casual name. Oh, yeah, the Tech God. There he is. Thanks for watching. But I was like, you could have easily gotten the Apple November event to a full hour if you would have just designated it to, okay, we have some new Macs and Apple Silicon to talk about, but we also have one more thing. And then you could have unveiled AirPods Max, because it was kind of like a brand new category. I know it's AirPods branding, but none of the other AirPods are over-ears, right? Like this was the first time basically in the last 20, 30 years, or I can't remember if Apple ever did over-ears. They probably did. But like, it was the first time in a long time Apple was ever like entering that over-ear headphone space, which I thought was a pretty big deal. And it was a brand new design, and they didn't want to talk about that on stage. Like, they didn't want to address it. They didn't want to talk about why we designed it this way and how capable the hardware is and how great the silicon is and next-gen sound quality and how no one else can beat our transparency mode. They didn't want to talk about all that. They just plopped it on the website one morning. I remember getting the text from Nick super, super early. I woke up. It was like 5:30, and I checked my phone. I was like, oh. Okay, I guess we have AirPods Max. And back then we all thought it was going to be AirPods Studio. But I was like, why wasn't that part of the November event? They could have easily, like, even if you could say, oh, they're not ready yet, you could have easily announced AirPods Max at the November event and said that they ship next month. They've done that before. And it's not like AirPods Max was going to, like, cannibalize sales of anything else. It's like it's $550 headphones. How is that going to cannibalize the sale of $250 earbuds, you know? I think a HomePod is coming tomorrow, similar to how we got Apple TV when everyone was only expecting iPads. Ooh, that would be interesting. Like a full size HomePod, a new HomePod. Yeah, if one had a screen, I think that would be the only way I'd be interested in a new full size HomePod is if they got a display on it and it kind of became more of a home hub, with a center stage camera so you could FaceTime call and stuff. I was talking with the man about tech Viper and oh, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name. There's so many people I got to keep track of, but Trent, I think his name was Trent. Was also on the Man About Tech stream, and he brought up how important or how useful it would be to have an Apple made device, with FaceTime support, because we all have iPhones. Come on, let's be honest. Android doesn't exist. It's all made up, right? But like to have a connected device with a really good sound system that doesn't need a battery, that doesn't need a home button, that doesn't need a biometric or anything, just a connected device, because, HomePods don't lock, similar to AirPods. There's no password. But you could just call it and answer, and the elderly could pick up the call and see the person they're talking to, because you try to teach your grandparents or you try to teach the elderly how iPads work, but still, like I have family members, several family members I can think of off the top of my head, where it doesn't matter how many times you tell them, okay, press the home button, swipe to unlock, and then answer this call when it's coming in. If you could just have a device without a battery or a charger to worry about that you can just call with a really simple UI. And as soon as it starts ringing, it's just like the home phone is ringing, and then grandma or whatever can walk up to it and just hit accept. And they could do that like Google Duo type thing where they can see the face of the other person. They can see who's calling and just hit answer. And then the elderly can hear you very clearly. They can see you and you can see them. Like, I feel like, yeah, like Ethan just said, if it has a touch screen, I want it. If not, I'll wait. I just feel like there's not much, like both Google, Apple, and I think even Amazon tried to find ways of making smart speakers that don't have screens that are just like really good sound quality, like the original HomePod or like the Google Home Max. We still use both, to be honest. But both companies just figured out there's not much demand for someone that wants a smart speaker that also has super good audio quality, like that you're willing to pay a premium, like over $100 for it. Like the HomePod Mini or the Google Nest Mini or the Echo Dot, all of those have sold incredibly well. It's like if you're going to have a smart speaker that you're using passively, where you just call out to it and say, hey, play some music, set a timer. People don't want to drop $300 on that thing. People don't want to spend big dollar on a passively used digital assistant, but they'll spend $50, maybe $100. It's on sale. It's a good Christmas gift or whatever. That would be really cool if we got that tomorrow. Let's see. Hope you don't take this the wrong way, but your psoriasis is looking incredibly clear. How would I take that the wrong way? Thank you. That's a compliment. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm sure paying for it, unfortunately, through the crazy American healthcare system. So it's not that cheap, unfortunately, because of where I live. But yes, I'm very grateful that the psoriasis has cleared up. Yeah. Are we getting a Mac? This is just so weird that Macs are releasing in January. It's just not like Apple to give a new chip. They usually love to brag about their chips. That's what has me thinking about this, is like, if it is a site refresh in January, if that ends up being true, it's probably not that good a chip. That's my only thought. Like, if the M2 Pro or M2 Max were a big deal, they probably wouldn't do a site refresh in January. Like, if they were a substantial chip upgrade, it would probably be a spring event worthy announcement. The fact that it could come tomorrow makes me think maybe this is just kind of a minor spec boost. So to point to evidence that this is more likely to be happening than many of us would think, there have been new unreleased MacBook Pros with Wi-Fi 6E spotted in the Canadian regulatory database. So there's new filings of new model numbers that have not been listed before that are capable of having the 6 gigahertz band and Wi-Fi 6E. Again, this is not like a substantial upgrade. Like, this is not a redesign. It will look identical. It's still going to have the notch. It's still mini LED. It's still 120 hertz. But it's just rumored to be like slightly new, faster chip. But if it ends up being just another repackaged version of the 5 nanometer chip, then I don't see this being that much of a performance enhancement. Maybe like 10% faster than the M1 Pro or M1 Max. Site refresh doesn't mean minor in my opinion. Well, I also think it doesn't mean major. Site refresh kind of is wild card territory, but January to me screams minor because like we mentioned earlier, there's typically a lot less money spent by consumers in general in January. They notice this in the movie theater business too. Like you don't release big movies in January. You release the biggest movies in summer and Christmas, which is kind of Apple's approach to marketing and stuff. So it doesn't necessarily mean minor, but it also doesn't necessarily mean it's a big deal. Apple just wants to announce the very first 3 nanometer chip, obviously. I feel like if they were 3 nanometer, they could be a pretty massive performance gain, but I guess we'll find out, right? It would suck if these new MacBook Pros will cost more. I actually don't think it's the end of the world if they do kind of suck because to be completely frank, I still think that the M1 Pro and M1 Max MacBook Pros are undefeated. Like I'm using one right now. That's what I'm streaming with. And I think the microphones that you're hearing me on right now, like the MacBook Pros just are incredible hardware and nothing comes close to touching them in terms of performance and battery life. Nothing Windows has, nothing Dell has, nothing, anybody can come up with really touches these things. So if Apple's just trying to slightly top themselves a little bit with a 10% faster chip and maybe it's a decent jump in graphics. The highlight of it is okay, well, now you can get the M1 Pro and M1 Max laptops for way cheaper because they're no longer the latest version. But I still absolutely am going to recommend them, similar to how I totally recommend the M1 MacBook Air because you can find that for like $700 now secondhand. And that M1 chip is still super duper fast, super capable, great battery life. It just happens to have a kind of dated design. Whereas the M2 Pro and M2 Max MacBook Pros, those aren't even going to have the new design. Those are still going to have the same number of ports, still MagSafe, still the same 120 hertz mini LED display. So if they just suddenly make all the M1 Pro and M1 Max chips no longer the newest version, resale value probably goes down a bit. So if you're in the market, I would say if you're waiting for this new refresh, I would say buy the old models because that's going to be 99% the same experience and you'll probably save several $100s just by getting it because that's the old model, it's not the new one anymore. It's like, who cares if it's an M2 versus whatever. Thank you, Gavin, for your support. I bet the starting price is the same, but 96 gigabytes of RAM is definitely going to cost a premium. 96 gigs of RAM in a MacBook, really? You think they'll go there? I guess they could, yeah. People don't spend a lot in January because they're recovering from holiday spending. True, which is why I don't think you would put a big product that you had a lot of faith in January. Apple unveiled the original iPhone in January, but it wasn't selling yet. Let's see. It's an Apple event tomorrow. There's a bunch of Bry Guy D, whatever your name is. There's basically a bunch of sources that are all claiming at the same time that there's going to be a site refresh tomorrow. And there's a lot of people, as you can tell by the poll of this stream, we're fairly split. We've got 340 people voting. 45% say no, there's not going to be a refresh, and 55% are saying yes. Even if the M2 Pro and M2 Max are more powerful, the M1 Pro and M1 Max are going to be an absolute steal. Like most people won't even be able to push the chip to its limits. I struggle to be honest. Oh, well, I appreciate the super chat, Bright Guy, but I feel like I just answered your question. 96 gigabytes of RAM makes no sense. That's not a RAM configuration that anything has. It goes from 8, 16, 64 to 128. Well, people said the same thing about the MacBook Air, but when they refreshed the M2 MacBook Air, they gave it 24 gigs of RAM, which is not a very even, number. But does the Mac Studio offer? I thought the Mac Studio offered 96 in one of their configurations. Or is it max out at 64? Let me check real quick. I forget. No, yeah, it just goes from 64 to 128. So I guess someone could be basing that logic off of, well, if you're going to give 24 gigs of RAM to the MacBook Air, not quite 32, but not quite 16, maybe. Let's see. I have the binned M1 Pro, and I've never once said, dang, my MacBook Pro is too slow. Yeah, I agree. I think the M1 Pro and M1 Max are still going to be the steal. Let's just see. Would it be just for Mac Pro, not really the same as the consumer Macs? Well, we're talking MacBook Pros in general, so that none of this is consumer Macs. Tyler Forte says, what's your opinion on this, Drew? I think based not so much, I don't have that much faith in just a bunch of news sources all claiming they know something, because to me that's very easily faked. Like, I've definitely seen news agencies get very desperate lately. Um, and it's not, it's not everybody's fault. I know that the tech news is dry right now. I'm not afraid to admit that. I don't care. I don't need to pretend like there's bigger deals going on right now than there really are. Like when I start seeing articles about like, I don't know, this MacBook is this many years old, or Bill Gates said that he doesn't use an iPhone. When I start seeing articles like that, I'm like, okay, we're pretty dry. We're in the dead season right now. Sorry, it's getting kind of dark. I was relying on natural lighting for a while. But what I think is a better indication, more so than all of the sources claiming, hey, we have people telling us there's a site refresh tomorrow, is the databases. Once you start seeing unreleased Macs show up on databases, that's not usually like someone making something up. That's usually ends up being more accurate. And I will admit that there was a lot of evidence, and there was definitely a sense that Apple was about to drop new 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros end of last year. So I know Gurman was saying all of 2022 that there would be new ones by the end of the year, and that didn't happen. But they did drop the price. Burkhart brought this up, which I thought was a good point. They suddenly dropped the price of the certified refurbished 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros. They suddenly got cheaper, which they usually only do that when they're about to drop or when they just have dropped new MacBooks. So the fact that they just kind of dropped the certified refurbished price for no reason makes me think that, yes, there probably is some unreleased 14-inch, 16-inch MacBook Pros that are being tested in the Geekbench results, and they exist, but releasing them in January, my indication is that it's because these are not a very big upgrade. This is a very, very small spec boost where they give it Wi-Fi 6E and slightly faster chips that are not really that much faster. But honestly, eUploads brought up earlier that this is maybe just a good way to like, okay, M2 family has been released. We're done, right? That way they can say, okay, all the new M2 chips are out. And then they'll be ready to launch the M3 chip, which will be based on the 3-nanometer architecture later in the year. And they just don't want to have too much of a release overlap between M2 Pro and M3 because that's going to get confusing pretty quickly. They don't tend to want to overlap too much. You don't want to release the M2 chip and then later release M1 Ultra. You kind of want to be in the M2 season of life, and then you want to be in the M3 season of life, and they're kind of just rushing through the M2 family of chips. So even though it's not going to be very appreciated and it's probably not going to be much faster, they're just like, well, we got to release this at some point, so we might as well release it. And I think the once I saw the MacBook start showing up in the databases, I was like, that's probably it. Also, I feel like it's weird that the Mac Mini hasn't been refreshed. And that's not a very exciting update, especially if they just give it the M2 chip, which I think is pretty likely. Like M1 to M2 is not a huge performance gain in my experience based on comparing the MacBooks with M1s and M2 chips. It's like, okay, a little bit faster here and there, but also more prone to running too hot. And they tended to go cheap on the single NANDs, so the read and write speed took a hit. So it's like a toss-up. It's like, if you're an average consumer, I don't think you should pay extra just so that you can have the M2 chip. I don't think it really matters all that much. M2 Pro / Max tomorrow, M2 Ultra in March, and M3 at Dub makes sense to me. I think you're on the right track. I think that's just a little bit too fast, personally. I think it's more likely M2 Ultra will be summertime, and that's what they're going to put in the Mac Pro. And now that I've heard reports that the new Mac Pro is basically identical to the old Mac Pro, they just put in an Ultra chip, and they're no longer doing the rumored M2 Extreme. But I don't know. I think that I guess there's a chance they could do the M2 Ultra in March, but M3 chip coming out for the 15-inch MacBook Air makes sense, but everyone that's talking about the 15-inch MacBook Air won't really give a concrete timeline. That's what I've noticed. There's a lot of people claiming that Apple is going to release a 15-inch MacBook Air later in the year, but No one's saying when. They're just saying at some point. Summer makes sense, but also I have a harder time believing that they would update the Mac Pro not at the developer conference because they don't update the Mac Pro very often, but they still always update it at Dub Dub. Like the Trash Can Mac Pro came out at Dub Dub, and the Cheese Grater Mac Pro came out at Dub Dub. So it would only make sense to me that if you were doing the M2 Ultra chip, you would do it on a developer keynote. I could see it going either way. I don't feel very confident in my prediction, but I just wouldn't be surprised if they want to space out the release between the M2 chip and the M3 chip a little bit further than just a year. You know, it's easy to forget. We just got the M2 chip last June. So if we got the M3 chip this June, that would be a pretty quick like turnaround, like rush through the stopgap. And I think that if the M2 Ultra is not that fast a chip, and then you would announce the M3 chip just like a couple months later. Well, I guess they're stuck doing that. They probably could put the M2 Ultra in the 16-inch, but it'd basically be like an Intel MacBook, hot and no battery life. Yeah, I don't even know if physically that would work that way. I don't know how big the die is, but um, given that there hasn't been many Mac Pro rumors, I'd say it's still a long way off, even if it's coming. No, there has been Mac Pro rumors, Josh. There's just not very good ones, which is why I believe them. Personally, I'm more inclined to believe rumors that deliver bad news because I noticed that most of the time when someone fakes a story, it's usually that something is better than anticipated because that drives more clicks. And most people don't like to believe in reports or rumors that point to a bad situation. You know, what makes for a really good news cycle, which is going on right now, is there's new MacBook Pros and a new Mac Mini coming tomorrow. These are going to be so fast. They're going to be so great. They're going to be fantastic. What doesn't sound as good as, well, it's coming in January. And we know, and Apple knows, that consumer spending goes down a lot in January. So if they're releasing them now, it's probably because they're not very good. It's probably because they're barely faster and they look identical, and it's just like a minor spec upgrade so that they can get on with the M3 series of chips, which sounds like the more interesting upgrade rather than the M2, which is just kind of overclocking M1. So in a similar way, basically the most recent round of reports, which is from Bloomberg, and Bloomberg's been pretty spot on with all of the Apple Silicon core counts and stuff. Like, they pretty accurately displayed the specs of the M1 chip before it launched and the M1 Pro, M1 Max chips. They were very accurate with all of the Apple Silicon leaks leading up to their launches. So that's why I'm more inclined to believe them. I'm like, I don't know who your source is, but whoever your source is surrounding Apple Silicon development sounds pretty accurate. And they claimed that there was a time where Apple was working on, so someone was asking earlier, that extreme naming never made sense to me. I don't know if they would have used the term extreme, but I do believe that there was at point a time for them to, you know, we have the M1 Max, right? And the M1 Ultra was two M1 Maxes stitched together, which also Bloomberg reported would happen. And they also said for the Mac Pro, they were working on a way to essentially stitch four M1 Maxes together. So it'd be like doubling up on the Ultra. I don't know what you want to call it. Maybe it's not extreme. Maybe it's God tier. Maybe it's they just brand it not as an M chip. They just call it the Pro chip or something, or X1 or something special. But more recently, the reports are Apple decided that all of the time and investment and money that would have been spent on developing such a chip and the market for it would have been so insanely small that the investment in manufacturing it wouldn't have made sense. It was like, okay, maybe a couple of YouTubers would buy it, but that's not enough to keep an assembly line going. Like, as you hit this law of diminishing returns, right? As chips get faster and faster and Macs get more and more capable, there's more and more people like me that used to say, no, for my performance needs, I need an iMac Pro because I need something that can export videos really quickly. But now when we have a chip as fast as the M1 Max chip and I can put that in a laptop, yeah, I don't need a desktop anymore because I can easily turn my laptop into a desktop when needed, but then also take it on the go, so it's the best of both worlds. Very easy to turn a laptop into a desktop, but you can't turn a desktop into a laptop easily, at least. So the most recent round of reports is that they are not redesigning the Mac Pro, and they are not going to go forward with the four chips tied together anymore. They're just going to do basically M2 Ultra, They're just going to do two M2 Max chips stitched together, and they're saying that's going to be fast enough because the Mac Studio already has outperformed the Intel Mac Pro. They've already beaten it. So the M2 Max doubling up to M2 Ultra is just going a little bit further. And the Gurman report was that it won't have user upgradable RAM, but it will still have PCIe slots that you can put in external drives, or not external, sorry, additional drives, and networking cards, as well as potentially extra GPU cards, but I'm not sure how that works with the integrated GPU. Maybe they can work in conjunction. So you can have integrated graphics working alongside discrete graphics, like a dedicated GPU. So it's a little bit modular, but not that modular. And it sounds like they kind of want to just recycle the existing Mac Pro design, which is definitely a bummer. They also have no reason to try what's going on in PC land. They're still trying to catch up to M1. Well, I think Apple has probably just rightfully figured out that most consumer computer sales are laptops. Like, people are either buying, everyone's buying phones. Some people buy tablets, but if you need a computer, it's most likely going to be a laptop. And we've gotten to the point with ARM architectures being so efficient and so fast that the number of people that can say, no, the M1 Pro or M1 Max chip is not fast enough for me, that number is dwindling. Whereas like 5-6 years ago, the fastest Intel chips or the fastest AMD chips we could fit in a laptop were just so much worse than the chips we could get in our desktops that it was like, yeah, no, for that performance, I need a desktop. Now it's like, I don't really need a desktop anymore. I mean, some people that have basically relatively infinite money to spend on their setups can say, I need the fastest possible chip no matter what. But Apple's realizing, okay, we'll give you the Mac Studio for that. And now they've probably seen the sales of the Mac Studio, and they're realizing how many people are opting for the M1 Ultra. Not that many, because M1 Max is still plenty fast, and you can get a lot of performance out of that and save yourself several $1,000s. And they're like, okay, well, if we can't convince that many people to buy the M1 Ultra, why are we going to try to do an M1 Extreme? Like, also, the giant company, I know they exist. I know people say, no, you don't get it, Drew. There's some companies that need every ounce. I'm like, yeah, those companies are using custom computers with servers that link all together. They're not buying, like, off the Apple Store one computer to power their entire business. They're not rendering Toy Story 5 on a Mac Pro. They've got giant custom servers with custom software and maintenance and stuff. Yeah, I understand why Apple decided that was probably not worth it. It's a bit disappointing because I feel like in a lot of ways the Apple Silicon Mac Pro was going to be like the Tesla Roadster of Macs. It was one of those things that we kept waiting for, and it kept getting delayed, and we were like, well, I'm not going to buy it, but I'm fascinated to see. Like, as soon as Apple announced that they were switching away from Intel, that's like one of the most common discussion points was like, oh man, can you imagine how fast the Mac Pro is going to be? Like, everyone was so excited to see how much faster the Mac Pro with Apple Silicon would be, but how many people were actually going to buy it? Like, most of the people discussing it was like, I don't need it, but I'd be curious to see the Geekbench results. Like, it would be a great flexing tool for the tech community it would be a great way for Apple to just brag and just say, like, look how fast it is, but it's also $8,000. It's like a super expensive Mac, and I'm guessing that their sales of the cheese grater Mac Pro were not that good either. They haven't really updated it, haven't really offered anything since they unveiled it in 2019. Yeah, it shipped at the end of 2019, and they didn't really do anything with it. So I get the impression that the sales for any Mac that's over $10,000 are incredibly low. And Tim Cook is like, yeah, I mean, we can do it, but it's not super profitable, so what's the point? Would not be surprised if 10% of Mac Pros were bought by tech YouTubers. 10%? Well, that might be right, yeah. I'll be honest, I don't know anybody outside of the YouTubes. I can think of YouTubers that bought Mac Pros, but I never saw one in the real world. I never saw them like in schools or at college campuses or like businesses. Like, never saw movie studios saying like, oh yeah, we need the Mac Pro for it. Like, no, I haven't seen that. The top end studio is already like putting a V12 in a Civic. Well, I feel like the footprint of the Mac Studio is a little bit better than a Civic, but yeah. Kevin says, I'm a software engineer. The M1 Pro on the CPU side has been fast enough for me. I have 8 to 10 different things running at the same time without hiccups. I need more storage and memory. Yeah, no, I'm with you there. I mean, the storage thing, I mean, does 8 terabytes not enough, or you just don't want to pay for 8 terabytes? Because I can understand that. Um, my guess is Apple is looking at the data of who's buying what MacBook, and they probably noticed that most people aren't buying the 8 terabyte. I'm one of the weirdos that did, I know, but I have a very specific use case. I don't think I'm a common example, but like we need to be able to work in and I need to be able to produce videos in a timely fashion and have a long battery life. And I need to be able to store lots of B-roll because of how many videos I produce. And I need to take all of that B-roll with me when I go on trips and stuff. Like we're planning a bunch of trips this year, so there's going to be a decent chunk. I actually don't know how good the internet's going to be where I'm traveling, but there's going to be a decent chunk of Tailosive Tech content later in the year that's not filmed in here. I don't really know where it's going to be filmed yet. It's going to be kind of improvising on the go, but we're one of the longest trips I think of all time I'll be taking later this year. But I'm going to see if I can work on that trip. I don't know if I can work and post as diligently as I do now. What's my current storage usage? Let me check. I'll go to, yeah, you can't hit about this Mac anymore. You got to go to general. They moved it. Storage settings. 3.54 terabytes available out of 8. So I've used 4.46 terabytes so far. But there's probably some stuff I could delete. But that's part of the thing. To me, buying additional storage is like buying time. I know I'm going to fill it up. I just know that if I buy more storage, I buy more time for me to have to cipher through what can I delete, what do I want to keep. There's definitely a lot of B-roll that I need to have access to for both the EV channel and the tech channel. That's like, I need to have my own footage that I can show and cut away to. And I want to keep that stuff locally. And I can't just build a server because I'm not going to be able to take that server with me if I go on a big trip and I'm gone for months at a time. So I need that to be local. Basically, when you record multiple 4K at 60 videos a day, you use up a lot of space. And when you have to store, I mean, I could just tell you like the size of B-roll folders. If I go into tech footage, my tech B-roll is, why don't I just show you? Tech footage, we're at 145 gigs. EV footage, oh, there's a lot of stuff in here, but just in the Tesla B-roll, there's, I guess, not as much in there. Yeah, 165 gigs in the community B-roll. Basically, a couple of years ago, I got some falsely claimed copyright strikes against my channel because I showed a clip from someone else's video, and it didn't matter if I credited them or anything. They were abusing the YouTube copyright tool. It was transformative and it was protected under fair use. I verified that I was right, and YouTube sided with me later. But there was a several week long process where YouTube wasn't investigating the blackmail that was going on by this guy, and I had multiple copyright strikes attached to my account. So ever since then, I've been very, very paranoid with the footage I show. So that's why I intentionally do not show footage from other content creators. But B-roll is a pretty crucial part of my videos because no one wants to look at my face for 10 minutes, obviously. And if I really was committed to the craft, I wouldn't show my face at all. I would probably just talk and show B-roll the whole time. But I don't think I could produce content as quickly or as efficiently if I had to show B-roll for every single portion of the video. So best part of Finder, it tells you the folder storage size. Windows still doesn't unless you place it in a zip folder. Is that true, Josh? I didn't know that. Yeah, I've never had a good experience with Windows whenever I tried. I liked Windows 7. I take that back. When I had a PC back in the day, custom-built PC, I thought Windows 7 was great. It was reliable, it was consistent, and I was happy with it. And then Windows 10 ruined everything. I know everyone says Windows 8 ruined everything, but when I got Windows 10, a bunch of apps stopped working. And would you be happy if Apple bought Blackmagic, or do you think they'll misuse the power like Elon did with Twitter? No, I think that Apple's a bit more calculated than that. Like, I mean, they could misuse it, but at least when Apple abuses their power, they tend to do it to benefit themselves. I don't really know what Elon is benefiting from with this whole Twitter thing. I guess he ensures that he can't get banned from Twitter. So by buying it, he can make as many jokes as he wants, but his jokes are cringy. So I mean, like, I think of Apple abusing Twitter like how they bought Dark Sky. Basically, they bought a weather app that a lot of people liked and said, we're going to integrate this into our own weather app and we're going to take it off Android. I'm like, well, that's just rude. Like, there's a bunch of people that paid for Dark Sky and were like happy to use it on Android. And Apple's just like, no, we don't want you to have nice things. So because and we don't like you, Android, um, we're just going to take it away. So yeah, it's like, okay, maybe if Apple bought Blackmagic, they would make it super compatible with Apple hardware and Apple software, and therefore if you don't have a Mac, Blackmagic becomes really hard to use. But for selfish reasons, I would be like, okay, well, most of the people buying Blackmagics were probably going to be using Apple hardware anyway. They kind of go hand in hand. I do use external drives, but I can't always pack a bunch of them with me everywhere I go. I have tons of external drives, but I've filled them all up. I actually use this one pretty frequently to record my videos to because my Blackmagic camera has a USB-C port, so you don't have to write to an SD card or a CFast card and use an adapter. You can record footage directly to like a 2 terabyte SSD, and then I can just plug this SSD into my MacBook, and that imports a lot faster than the SD cards do. So I do have tons of external drives, but I'm telling you, when you're on a plane and when you're on a trip and you're packing tons of things and you got to be tight and you got to be efficient, or you've got limited ports to work with and stuff. I don't want to have to pack around like, oh, I need the B-roll. Which drive did I put that on? Let me get a different drive for that. And oh, wait, that's just my filming drive. So yes, I know the 8 terabyte option is expensive, but it is incredibly convenient and it has saved me a lot of time because relatively at this point, it feels like I have infinite storage. Like I can throw as much crap as I want. Sometimes when me and my friends would occasionally have shot projects that aren't for YouTube. Like my friend does video work that he doesn't post online, but it's more like uh, personal hobby slash client work, like freelance work. He has a Red Komodo, and he'll film things on his Red that are like Red RAW footage, which is like hundreds and hundreds of gigabytes. And the fact that I can just chuck that on my computer at any moment and just be like, yeah, I've got the space for it, no problem. That peace of mind of not having to worry about is my storage full. That saved me the time of not having to cycle through. Hold on, what can I delete? What can't I delete? Um, so it's not so much like I'm convinced, no, there's no way I could work. Like, for instance, if tomorrow my 16-inch MacBook Pro died or something, or someone stole it, I wouldn't probably buy 8 terabytes again. Like, at the time that the MacBook Pro came out, the channel was doing pretty well, and there was a lot of people were bizarrely supporting the channel. You know, they were super chatting and signing up for the memberships. The stream did really well. Basically, I was planning on getting the 4 terabytes, but then the stream did so well. I was like, okay, let's just go all out because I'm only gonna buy this MacBook, and that's gonna be my last Mac for. I agreed to my wife. I was like, I want to spend a lot of money on this MacBook because I know we're taking on trips. So if I'm gonna have one Mac that I can take with me, I want to go all out with it. And she was like, okay, if you go all out, then let's not buy another $6,000 Mac next year. So how long is this Mac gonna last you? And I said, well, the iMac Pro lasts me 5 years, so maybe I can get at least 5 years out of the next MacBook Pro. Only reason really there wasn't really anything wrong with the iMac Pro. The only reason I was upgrading was because I needed a laptop to take with me on trips. Um, and I was like, okay, now I've got a super fast MacBook with the 120 hertz, with the fast speed and the big SSD. What am I going to need? What do I need to upgrade this for in the future? And I was like, I couldn't think of anything. So I agreed that I wouldn't upgrade my Mac for like 5 years, I think, or 6 years or something like that. She was like, let's not go crazy and buy, 5 to 6 grand computers every year, which I agree with her. You want to be responsible. So I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to have one Mac for the next, 5, 6 years, let's go with 8 terabytes. So I know that storage is not ever going to be an issue, even if I upgrade cameras or film on more raw stuff in the future. I don't think I will, but yeah. Did I end up making the Aptera order? Yeah, I did a video on it. It's the channel trailer on Tailosive EV. I've got an order in for an Aptera. Hopefully they make it to market. I'm thinking my MacBook will last me for at least 6 years if I take care of it. Yeah, I personally seeing the math I was doing in my head as to why I think I can get my current MacBook Pro to last me 6 years is, for one, the battery is incredible. It's the best battery life in any laptop. No one has disputed me on that. I keep waiting for someone to correct me. Okay, like as far as like plain legal laptops. Okay, there might be some military grade laptop that doesn't run Windows or Mac OS or Linux. That lasts, that you can't take it on a commercial flight, but maybe it lasts a week or something. But as far as like, okay, a laptop that's capable of video editing. Thank you, JT, for your 16 months of support. It's going well. I was like, okay, the battery life is insanely good because it's basically as big as the battery can be, and you can still take it on a flight. And the chip is super efficient. It barely uses any energy when you're not doing intensive tasks. And it has 120 hertz, which I love. It has mini LED, so it's got great dynamic range, more than I care about. The speaker system is amazing. I use it every day. I don't even have external speakers I plug into because the onboard ones are so good. The microphones are fantastic. I'm using them right now. I was like, with all of that in mind, like even if the battery health deteriorates, it's still going to have an all-day battery life because it literally, if you're not doing power intensive tasks, the MacBook can last like weeks without being plugged in. I've done that myself. If you're just using it, like I was just using it for like web browsing or general like communication with people. If you're just using it like a basic laptop, yeah, you can go several weeks without charging it. And the chip is so fast. The other math I was doing in my head is like, okay, I know there will be faster chips. Like tomorrow, I think it's pretty likely we're going to get an M2 Pro, M2 Max refresh of the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros. And yeah, Mac Mini sounds right too. Mac Mini should have been updated last year. I'm kind of surprised it still hasn't been. So another one makes sense to me. Hey, Mike M, another Mike. There's so many Mikes. Thank you for signing up to Tailosive Tech Plus. I appreciate that. I was like, okay, right now though, when I finish a video, like a tech or an EV video, that's 4K at 60, which in my opinion is pretty overkill. Most people don't watch my videos at 4K, but I do it anyway just to cover that edge case. 8K is just stupid, in my opinion. Sorry. But I was like, all right, I can export a 10-minute video in less than 10 minutes. Like it can export 4K at 60 faster than you can watch it. So typically like a 10-minute video will take like 6 minutes or so to export. And with that being the case, it's like, okay, maybe the 3 nanometer chip is like twice as fast. So now I can export a 10-minute video in 3 minutes instead of 6 minutes. I don't think it'll be twice as fast, but let's just say, for the sake of the example, a future generation Apple Silicon chip is twice the speed as my current MacBook. That means that, okay, buying a whole new one, which is going to be expensive because I'm going to want lots of storage and a decent amount of RAM. I want to go kind of high end with it. That's going to be another $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 purchase to save 3 minutes on the export process. And I'm doing roughly 2 videos, maybe 3 videos in a day. So would you spend $3,000 to $4,000 to save 6 minutes of export time a day? Like, I guess you could make that argument depending on how much you make, but with my current income, I can't justify that. So that was my thought process. It was like, okay, even if it was instant, even if the new 1 nanometer chip that comes out on the M5 chip in a few years, even if that can export my videos literally that fast, I just hit export and it's done, I'm still only saving 7 minutes of video. So it's like, that's the law of diminishing returns in effect, because when I was editing my 4K at 60 videos on my iMac Pro, it did not export faster than, you could watch it. So like a 10-minute video that I finished working on would take roughly, I want to say 16 to 20 minutes to export. So it's like, yeah, when you go from 16 to 20 minutes down to like 7, now you're talking about saving like, okay, this is knocking off 10 to 20 minutes of the or 30 minutes to 40 minutes per day of like waiting around to, I can't upload the video yet, it's not done exporting. But even that is like, I didn't mainly buy this MacBook Pro just for the speed. Like I told people on the podcast and on streams and stuff, I was definitely gonna buy the new MacBook Pro that came out in 2021 regardless, because we were actively planning trips for January. We were like, we're gonna be gone and I need to be able to work on those trips. So I need a laptop. I don't even care if it's slower than my iMac Pro. I just need something that's fast, that runs Final Cut, that I can take with me. The fact that it ended up being faster than my iMac Pro is great, and I'm very happy about that, but that wasn't like the sole reason. Now that I have the mobile powerful workstation, yeah, I that's why I think I could even go over 6 years on the same laptop, which I think it would be cool to review tech as it ages. I kind of want to get into that anyway this year. I think that as tech is peaking and kind of maturing and starting to get more incremental upgrades, tech reviewers are probably going to need to focus more on buying older stuff for cheaper, which I think is more interesting, honestly, because the new stuff isn't that great. When the new stuff is kind of boring, we better start talking about what's already here and what you can get it for deal wise. Karen, thank you for the super chat. Let's not get excited. The only way to avoid disappointment is to not expect anything. I still don't think they'll update anything tomorrow. Fair enough. 45% of people who voted on the poll of this stream, there's been almost 600 votes now. 45% of you agree. So it seems like the community is still pretty split. Elizabeth says, if there is a site refresh, would I review it? I was debating this today because I read the news this morning and I'm still undecided. I think where I fall on it is I don't think they're going to be 3 nanometer. I just think it's too soon to launch the 3 nanometer chips. But there was that report from the information that claimed that they have started production of 3 nanometer. Hey, Consumer Compute signed up for Tailosive Tech Pro. I got to update the end credits of my next tech video. Thank you so much for signing up for Tailosive Tech Pro. I appreciate that. So my biggest issue is like if it's just 5 nanometer chip again, I'm pretty sure it's going to be just like the M2 chip. It's going to be, okay, it runs a little bit hotter and it runs a little bit faster, but not that much. Yeah, I mean, if I would review one, I would get the 14-inch because I already have the 16-inch, and I would definitely get it in silver. Not to keep, just to review for the channel. I think the only way I would consider reviewing it is if it's 3 nanometer. I think if it's just another 5 nanometer chip, I don't really care. I know that's not going to be that much faster. But if it's 3 nanometer, it might be fun to kind of edit with that for a while. Because if it genuinely does improve my workflow, it would be kind of fun to showcase like, hey, for one, this is cool. It's faster now. But for two, also, I can get my work done faster. So that kind of helps with my productivity. Consumer Compute says, you don't have to. Just keep up the good work. Nah, I'm a man of my word. Your name will be in the credits of my next video, I promise. Probably not much new to review. Yeah, especially in January. It's like, I mean, there's not that much to talk about anyway, which kind of makes me want to review it. But also, if it's 5 nanometer, there's still not much to talk about in the first place. I don't have anything to test out Wi-Fi 6E, which is probably the most noticeable upgrade. What's the worst deal? iPhone 14 Plus, iPad 10, or Tailosive Tech Ultra? Definitely Tailosive Tech Ultra. Don't sign up for that. It's a joke. I put it there because YouTube asked me to have several tiers, and I was like, okay, if I have Tailosive Tech Plus and I have Tailosive Tech Pro, there's obviously going to be people asking for Max and Ultra. So I might as well have them so that people don't ask me when I'm going to do them. They're there, but don't do it. It's a terrible deal. Tyler Forte did it. I don't know why, but he did it. Joshua, thank you for your support for 14 months. He says it's just a trailer for the next season of Ted Lasso. That would be kind of hilarious. We just get more Apple TV Plus trailers. Is it worth getting a Tesla now coming from a Honda Civic? I just paid it off. I don't know your financial situation, and I don't know what you personally prefer. I know a lot of people that don't like Teslas, and close friends and family members. Tesla, in my opinion, is a very specific. It's doing very well, to be honest, but like they're selling well, but you kind of need a particular personality for it. Like if you're okay with doing everything through a screen and, not having ultrasonic sensors or park assist and, kind of having cheap materials for the sake of a high quality battery pack with good software. Like, yeah, I would definitely take a Tesla over a Honda Civic. That's for sure. But I'm in a weird use case. Like I make videos about my car and stuff. I don't know what you're using it for, but I would much rather prefer the Tesla over anything else on the market, but that's because I like clean, simplistic, minimal interiors. I hate gas cars. I hate gas engines. I hate oil changes and all that. I don't like a car that makes noise. So I Tesla is the best vehicle, in my opinion, available, but we all have different opinions. So it just depends on the kind of person you are. Um, drive your car until the wheels fall off. Well, that'd be dangerous. If you buy a Toyota BZ4X, then that won't be very long after you buy it. You think EVs are worth the price? Well, like I always say, worth the subjective. Like if you make $50,000 a year, then a Tesla is probably not worth it. But if you make $100,000 a year, then yeah, Tesla's probably a good deal. Just depends on your situation. Like, what do you use your car for? You know, if you work from home and you drive 10 miles a week, you probably shouldn't buy a $50,000 car. If you drive, more than the average person, maybe 1,500 miles or 2,000 miles a month, then okay, buying a car that doesn't take gas anymore might save you a lot of money. So splurging on a nicer one that's going to save you a ton of gas money over the long haul of the ownership, yeah, that's a good idea. It just depends. There's not a one size fits all for everybody. Um, Outside of the tech creator world, who is getting excited for new MacBooks every year? I don't know a single soul. I would argue inside the tech creator world, I don't think there's that many people getting excited. I'm not particularly excited. Like I'm mildly curious. I don't think excited is the right word, but I'm like curious to see what Apple does, even for products that I don't plan on buying. I think that's partially your guys' fault though. It's the tech community and you guys watching, because I know that like when Apple does something and how they do it. Even like I was not, even if the iPad 10 was great, even if the iPad 10 had Apple Pencil 2 support and it was $330, even if the iPad 10 was a great iPad, I wouldn't have bought it. I wasn't in the market for it, right? Like iPad OS is the bigger problem, and I like 120 hertz on my iPad Pro, and we knew the budget iPad wasn't going to get promotion, so it's like a lot of us, just like how some people watch the news, like or they watch sports. A lot of us just like watching Apple to be like, let's see what they try here, let's see what they do, even if we're not in the market for the product. I think there was a ton of interest based on how my videos performed. There's a lot of people that were really excited to watch videos and to speculate on what the Mac Pro could be. How many of us are buying Mac Pros? Like barely any of us. Like probably 1% of the views were actually potential buyers. But we're just kind of curious, like how is Apple going to handle this? How are they going to price it? How are they going to justify this refresh? When are they going to announce it? Apple's behavior in that way for unreleased products, I think, is fascinating, even if we don't plan on buying the product itself. So partly because of you guys hyping me up in the tech community or getting excited about something, that makes me curious of what's going on, but I'm not like, ooh, I can't wait. Like, I'm like going to lose sleep at night. Oh boy, is the new MacBook coming? Like, excited's not the right word, but I'm interested. Like, where's this going to go? That kind of thing. You think Apple is surprising us tomorrow? Is that's the title, Brian? I think they will surprise a decent number. I'm leaning towards yes at this point, mostly because of the devices showing up in the database. I think that's a pretty good indicator. Karen, thank you for the super chat. He says, I recently test drove a Tesla Model X. The new steering yoke feels super cool, but also a little weird. The giant glass windshield is awesome. Yeah, the Model X is still my dream vehicle. If I had all the money in the world, that's the one I'd buy. I'm mad at myself for getting an iPad 9 literally a week before the iPad 10 came out. Why? The iPad 10's not worth it. Don't buy that either way. I guess you could have got the iPad 9 at a discount, though. This is our version of watching sports. Yeah. Well, I think it's more interesting than sports, but I have my own reasons for that. But 5% improvement over M1 Pro is what $1 Snake says. That's about in line with I'm expecting. Karen was saying earlier, like, don't get excited because that's how you disappoint yourself. Like, I don't think I'll be disappointed either way. If a new MacBook Pro comes out tomorrow, I'll be like, okay, cool. Let's see what they changed. How small of an upgrade is this? Is it worth it? Probably not. And if there's not a new one tomorrow, I'll be like, that's funny. The tech community, like, convinced themselves that there was a big release and there wasn't. Like, I don't know. I'm not, like, super pumped or I'm going to be super disappointed if we don't get anything tomorrow. Let's see. I really make my iPad Pro as a digital photo booth for daily. Set the screen time out to never open Photos apps. Yeah, I remember you telling me about that, AJ. If you could change all the iPhone's designs to any design before iPhone 10 and keep MagSafe, etc., what would you choose? What? I don't know what you're trying to say, Harvey. Keep the iPhone design before the 10, but keep MagSafe. What? I don't have as much like I don't know. I don't. I'm not like super nostalgic, I guess. So it's not like, oh, I wish we were back in the iPhone 4 days or something. Like I mean, I guess I choose the newest one, iPhone 8. You know, I do miss the rounded chassis. I will admit that. I tend to not be that nostalgic of a person. I know some people that are just like, the iPhone 5 is the best design. It was peak. I'm like, what? This is a little boxy phone. It got a little taller, whatever. Like it's so much better now. The full screen display with the ProMotion and like no, like I don't know. I tend to like the newest one the most. Thank you, Penn, for the 4 months of Tailosive Tech Max. That's absurdly generous. I wish the revival of airport lineup so my Mac can back up itself daily, like my iOS devices. I would love that, but it's probably going to hurt iCloud sales. I think Apple will introduce a new dongle so you can use the Apple Pencil 2nd Gen on the iPad 10th Gen. Probably not, but even so, it'd be a bad idea. Let's see. Wonder if it'll have HDMI 2.1. That would be interesting if they could swing that. But yeah, that did feel like a noticeable exclusion from the 2021 MacBook Pro updates. iPhone 8 with MagSafe is basically what he's saying. Yeah, I guess. But you can, I looked it up. You can add MagSafe back to older phones just with a case, even if that phone didn't have MagSafe. Like, I was curious. I was like, could you bring MagSafe to the iPhone 10 through a case? And it was like, yeah, just look up iPhone 10 with MagSafe support, and they have that. It's like a case that fits the 10 and the 10s, and it adds MagSafe to it. So as long as you got a case on it, it'll still snap to Duo and charge via MagSafe Duo, or it'll snap to MagSafe accessories. I don't think the MagSafe like wallet will work. I don't think even the MagSafe battery pack would work, but most people have said the Apple MagSafe battery pack isn't a good deal anyway. There's third-party MagSafe battery packs that would work with the iPhone 10 plus MagSafe case because they have power buttons on them. So we can all agree the 10s was the best design, so glassy. No, we cannot. I don't think we can all agree. Everyone has different personal preferences, but I tend to like the newest one the most. Benji says, I have a Pixel 6 Pro right now, and I added a MagSafe ring to the back of it. See, there you go. This is why Qi 2 just makes so much sense to me. It's like, why don't we just accommodate the magnets? Because everyone's going to do it anyway. It's too good an idea to restrict to Apple. And it's very easy to copy. You can't really patent a magnetic ring. MagSafe tripod is kind of sketchy. Yeah, definitely. I don't know about a gimbal, but let's see. Could Apple discontinue the Mac Pro since the Mac Studio already outperforms the Mac Pro? I mean, nothing's impossible, Stick, but they kind of acknowledged the Mac Pro is coming at the Mac Studio event last March. They said, okay, now that we've finished the M1 family of chips, all that's left is the Mac Pro, but we'll save that for another day. Would they say that and then cancel the Mac Pro? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they could pull an AirPower, right, where they unveil it and say, yeah, this is totally real and it's coming, and then they cancel it. But I think it's more likely that they just kind of go lazy with it. They recycle the cheese grater Mac Pro. They throw an M2 Ultra chip in there. It's not that different. It's not that much faster than the Mac Studio, but it's slightly more modular because you can add PCIe slot supported drives, networking cards, or graphics cards. So they can say, see, it's more modular. Although the one thing I really hope about the rumor that the Apple Silicon Mac Pro is going to be identical to the Intel Mac Pro, please add an SD card slot. Like, come on. Like, they had that on the iMac Pro. They have it on the Mac Studio. We have it on our MacBook Pros. Why the heck does the $50,000 Mac Pro not have an SD card slot, right? Like, come on. Let's see. The reason they still have the Mac Pro is for money. Well, that's a good... I mean, you could argue that's why they sell anything, right? I'm still mad Apple skipped the iPhone 9 name. Why Apple was not the only one. 9 is just unlucky number, and it implies sub 10, I guess. I don't know. What would you like to see for an M3 MacBook Air? I would like better performance, better thermal architecture, and better speakers. I mean, yeah, what else could you expect from a MacBook. They tend to not redesign the MacBook Air very regularly. You know, they updated it in 2018, and they're basically still using that design for the M1 Air, which came out in 2020. So end of 2020. So they kept that around for several years. I feel like if they put an M3 chip in there, it's probably going to look just like the M2 MacBook Air, just not overheat as much, I guess. Yeah, that's all I would want. I don't think there's much about the design I would change. Oh, I take that back. The M2 MacBook Air had disappointing speaker quality to me. When I listened to sound quality on it, it sounded like a bad iPad sound system. Like not iPad speakers in a good way. Some iPad speakers are pretty good, but like the crappy kind of iPad speaker. And it got loud, but the bass was pretty bad. And I don't know why they can't go back to just putting the speakers, you know, directing up. What I noticed with the speaker grill on the MacBook Air is it's like in the hinge. It's not facing you. It's kind of going this way towards the screen and trying to bounce the sound off of the screen so that you can hear it, I guess. But MacBook Pro speakers are more facing like towards you, and they just hit way lower frequencies. I actually, from what I recall, the M1 MacBook Air had better speakers than the M2. So I guess better speakers would be good and less overheating. Also, the other thing is I know it's very difficult to do engineering wise, but I would really love it if we could have USB-C ports on either side. One port on the left, one port on the right, rather than both on the same side. That's just me. Um, or at least if you have to keep the two Thunderbolt ports together, like, okay, that's just too easy manufacturing wise to keep the two ports next to each other. I would say at least put MagSafe on the other side, because then I can charge it on the left through Type C if need be, or I can charge it through MagSafe on the right if need be. Just a way to charge it from either end is very helpful, especially for when you're traveling and you're in weird situations where you're not sure where your charger is going to be, and sometimes you got to sit this way on the plane or whatever. If you could just charge it from either side, that would be very helpful. Um, Let's see. Moon River, thank you for your support for 16 months. Wow, he says, hope we get a Mac Mini tomorrow. It has been super neglected, and it's sad. My prediction is that even the new Mac Mini will probably not be very good. I think it's most likely they'll just pop an M2 chip in there and call it a day. Gurman has been claiming that they're going to put like a more pro chip in the Mac Mini, but I feel like that's going to eat into studio sales too much. And it would be weird to launch a new product that's based on the M1 Pro, but I guess tomorrow the M2 Pro is coming, so maybe they're putting that in the Mac Mini. I don't know. Yeah, hopefully the Mac Mini gets some love because it definitely deserves it. Probably the best desktop Mac you can buy value-wise. Mac Studio is great too. It's just a little pricey. Karen super chatted, I've been using my maxed out 16-inch MacBook Pro since early 2020. I've gotten so used to the touch bar in Final Cut Pro and other apps. When I upgrade, I'll miss the touch bar. I definitely still miss it, but I'm just trying to get over it because I know it's not coming back. Come on, man. Because Apple now has a whole design team dedicated to putting speakers in the hinge from the MacBook, and they need something to do. Oh, God. Yeah. Buy HomePod minis if you need better speakers, right? I like having all my ports on one side when docking to a monitor. I don't think it hurts anything to have it. I mean, the monitor can usually give you more ports back, so I don't think it hurts anything to have one port on each side. Are we sure we're getting new Macs tomorrow? No, that's the point of the question mark in the title, and that's why the poll is split down the river. Sorry, split down the middle. I said Moon River. That's why I said river. All the sales on the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook ended today at Costco, Best Buy, etc. It makes you wonder why. To me, the best indication is them showing up in the Canadian database, but could be wrong. Maybe it's nothing. Or maybe it's not tomorrow. There's a good chance that maybe they're waiting till next week or later in the month. I was considering the Mac Mini, but yeah, ended up to consider those two laptops. Oh yeah, the M1 13-inch Pro. I went with the M1 MacBook Pro only because of the touch bar. Y'all are living in denial. I just know that the touch bar is not going to stick around. And I also kind of despised the M1 MacBook Pro. That design was so old and the ports weren't as good. Would be weird to do a refresh in January. I agree. I think that's why a lot of people are split on it. Do you think any of Apple's core apps need a redesign? Phone app, iMessage, etc. I don't think any of the apps need a fundamental redesign, but I would say iPadOS does. If you want to like do a fundamental core rewrite, iPadOS for sure, yes, but apps not really. I mean, I tend to like most of Apple's first party apps even though a lot of people don't agree with me. Like I love the iOS Mail app. I just think it's very simple and clean and it works, but everyone's like, "Oh no, it's like you got to use Gmail." And I like the Apple Stocks app. Um, Maybe some little tweaks here and there would be nice, but not like core rewrites. The phone app is pretty simple to me. iMessage is pretty simple. I think that there's people in the tech community that could get a hold of combining them, like putting the messages, phone, and contacts and FaceTime all into one app. It's like, yeah, us in the tech community could probably get a hold of that and understand it, but there's a lot of people that are outside of the tech community using iPhones that would probably get super duper confused if for every one of those functions they had to open the same app and know where in the app to go to find their contacts versus to start a FaceTime call versus a voice call. Where's the keypad now? I've seen concept art of it, and it's like, yeah, there's a way, but I just don't think it would necessarily save that. Like, what does Apple have to gain from reducing the number of total apps on the phone? Like, don't they want to have more apps on there so it looks like you get a lot of stuff out of the box? Um, I want iPad so with the apps on the side as an option. Pro apps, 3 apps, and split view. Huh. Only the M3 chip supports Mac OS. Then how am I streaming right now? March event equals M2 Pro / Max. Dub equals M2 Ultra. Don't expect the Apple VR. October, November is the M3. That sounds believable to me. Just because, I don't know, it doesn't, like Apple just refreshed not even a year ago the M2 MacBook Air, and they usually don't like refresh that like annually, at least from what I can remember. Well, maybe they did in the Intel days, but in the Apple Silicon days, the M1 MacBook Air went well over a year before they touched it again. So to me, if you're going to update the MacBook Air later this year and give it a 15-inch screen variant, you'd probably want to update the silicon in that variant, and then you'd have to update the silicon in the smaller MacBook Air too. So launching the 15-inch MacBook Air like in October with the M3 chip and refreshing the 13-inch MacBook Air with the M3 chip, that makes sense to me. The architecture would be ready by then. Um, maybe they get 3 nanometer for M2 Ultra just so that they can say, well, that's Ultra, it's on a different architecture and whatever, and then down the road they bring it to the cheaper Macs. But yeah, because the only problem I have with keeping 5 nanometer around for longer is TSMC did say that they expect for 3 nanometer chip devices to be shipping in the first half of 2023, which probably means around summertime. But to me, I could easily see that as just being like, they don't necessarily, just because it's 3 nanometer doesn't mean they have to rebrand the chip. That can be a behind the scenes type thing. Apple can talk about it on stage or on screen, I guess, when they have their event, but they could still brand a 3 nanometer chip as M2 something. And the fact that it sounds pretty likely that we're going to get an M2 Pro or M2 Max chip tomorrow makes me think, yeah, it's probably a little too early for 3 nanometer. But I'll be decently surprised if it ends up being 3 nanometer. I guess I'd be more inclined to review it. The phone app needs a redesign. Specifically, I mean the contacts extension of the app. It needs a better card-like interface or something where contacts are glanceable or grouping is better. I just don't notice. I can't visualize anything that would really work better, but maybe there's... I don't deny... I'm not disagreeing with you. I just don't notice. I just don't use my phone app and think, oh, they gotta fix this. A year where Apple pulls a snow leopard and adds 0 features and just focuses on bugs and optimizations would be fine with me. I don't think anyone would really complain about that either. I really just want a matte screen so it doesn't attract every speck of dust within 400 miles every time you close the lid. I think there's screen protectors you can get for your MacBook that kind of do that same thing. What if the first 3 nanometer chip is going in Apple's VR headset? Oh, brother. Ugh, I guess I'll definitely have to review that one, huh? Make it an option. You can between function keys and touch bar and function keys, but I don't see a purpose for the function keys to be so large. People wanted them to be big, I guess. It was like a selling point. They like having the big keys. I don't see how big keys hurt anything. It's like, would you rather have just more pointless metal on the keyboard? Like, if you're not going to have a touch bar, having the full size function keys is probably the best compromise. But yeah, I was always in favor of the option. It's probably just too complicated manufacturing wise to have some MacBooks with and some without. It would probably add a lot to the cost too. I would imagine it being like a $300 add on or $400 for the touch bar. Personally, I would do it, and I think I'm in the minority on that. Most people probably wouldn't, but I appreciated the touch bar so much to the point that yes, I would have spent the extra 300, $400 just to have that there. You could cut the function keys in half and have both. I think it would just get really redundant very quickly because half the time the touch bar is just showing volume, brightness, the same things that the function keys are showing. So if you had both, I don't know what it would show. It would be kind of weird half the time. Let's see. Josh says I would literally pay $400 for a touch bar. Once I knew that they were phasing the touch bar out, I was like, I'm not going to try to fall in love with it anymore. I like it, but I can't convince myself that I need to like hold on to it as long as possible. It's like, no, we know it's going away. Just rip off the band-aid. Um, this coming Sunday is Chinese Lunar New Year. I do not believe Apple will have any new product coming out around this time. Many people in China have week-long vacation. But it's not coming up on. They're not launching it this Sunday. They're launching it Tuesday, which I don't know when that translates to, but that's several days before Chinese Lunar New Year. I agree that it's very bizarre, regardless of if it's Chinese New Year, to launch a new product in January. That's very weird for Apple. But to me, that says a lot about how probably uneventful the product is. Like, if they're willing to drop it now, it's probably because they don't expect it to do very well, but they just feel like they got to get it out. Maybe they just don't want to manufacture M1 Pro and M1 Max chips anymore because they've got newer chips in the pipeline and they don't really want to redesign the new MacBook Pros, but they're like, well, we got to get these out because we're going to run out of inventory of the 2021 MacBooks. So let's just update it and drop it whenever, even if it doesn't sell well, whatever. If they do drop it in January, it means they probably don't care if it's that close to many other holidays. It's not day of the New Year, but it is weird to be dropping it along that time. Do you think Apple would put a new chip in the Mac Pro or just keep a new Ultra in the Mac Pro and older gen in the Mac Studio? That's what worries me actually the most, Curie, that Cry 1593. I don't know how to pronounce that name. But actually what worried me the most about them saying that they were just going to put M2 Ultra in the Mac Pro and not anything really much higher is it makes me think that the Mac Studio is more of a stopgap. That points to the idea it's like, well, would you put the M2 Ultra in the Mac Studio if you can get that chip in a Mac Pro? Because the Studio is probably going to be cheaper. And based on what Gurman's saying, the Mac Pro isn't going to have very modular RAM, just like the Mac Studio. So if you really just need that ultra performance or whatever, why wouldn't you just go for the Studio? It's smaller, probably cheaper, and it has a ton of ports. Okay, you can't put in your discrete GPUs or networking cards, but how many people are going to be buying Apple Silicon Macs but also expect to use discrete GPUs? Not that many in my view. So it points to the idea that perhaps the Mac Studio is a stopgap. It was just released to kind of hold us over until the Mac Pro is ready. Apple's not past doing that. They did it with the iMac Pro. They dropped it a little early. They kind of recycled a lot of the 27-inch iMac design just so that they could have a more pro-class Mac to keep us covered until the Mac Pro was ready the following year. And then they never updated it. The iMac Pro just like never really got a CPU refresh. It never got a GPU refresh. I think maybe once they offered a different GPU option, or later they got rid of the base CPU option. Like when they first launched it, you could get an 8-core iMac Pro, and then a few years went by, and then you could only get the 10-core. That was the base option. Maybe the Mac Studio is just another stopgap, or perhaps perhaps they put the M2 Ultra. A better case scenario is they put the M2 Ultra in the Mac Pro, but they don't put it in the Mac Studio for a long time. They wait. But even that, I have a hard time believing, because at the same time, I'm thinking like Apple doesn't like to release new products with older family chips, right? At least so far, from what I can tell. It's like they released the M1 Ultra and they said, okay, that's the family of M1 chips. And everything else that they've launched since then is M2. So we're probably getting M2 tomorrow. Mac Pro probably even get M2. So would they want to down the road after M3 comes out say, oh, and by the way, now the Mac Studio gets M2? Like I don't know. I have a harder time believing that. I think the Mac Studio being a stopgap sounds more likely, and they're just going to go back to they're just going to go back to saying like, okay, the Mac Mini is fast enough for your general desktop needs, and if you need something faster, I guess you'll just have to buy the Mac Pro, something like that. How come you say you hate white bezels, funny charging implementations, and camera bumps, but you love other crazy designs like Aptera and Cybertruck? I like functional designs that have purpose. White bezels have no purpose. Dumb charging implementations have no purpose. That just takes more time. That wastes my life, basically. If I have to get an adapter to plug in an Apple Pencil to an iPad, that's just dumb. That creates e-waste, and that, like, we've already solved the Apple Pencil problem years ago. It's just taken them so long to bring it down. Like, that's how it should work. That should not be a pro feature. That's just simple. That's intuitive. You should not have to get an adapter and a cable every time you want to pair your pencil to your iPad. White bezels, I would be more okay with if displays turned white when they were off. But the whole point of having a black bezel and a black border is to further blend the difference between what is the border and what is the display. It's more immersive that way. That's why when you go to the movie theater, they turn the lights down, not up, right? Because that helps you get more immersed in the screen. It's a safe border because you know that when the movie gets dark, it all blends together. That's why all TVs basically have black bezels. And that's why Apple probably hasn't updated the 24-inch iMac, and no one's saying that they're going to update it tomorrow because it probably didn't sell all that well. It looks too weird. But most monitors have black bezels. Apple killed white bezels across all the iPhones, all the iPads, all the MacBooks. They used to have them. They don't anymore for good reason. And vehicles like the Aptera and the Cybertruck have intentional, directly beneficial to the consumer reasons to look the way they do. The Cybertruck, as bizarre as it is actually the most aerodynamic pickup truck design I've ever seen. And the reason it's so weird is because it's made out of a extremely tough and thick stainless steel exoskeleton, which you can't curve and bend the way you normally can the body of a pickup truck. So most people want to use their pickup trucks in heavy-duty ways and kind of get them banged up. So Tesla wanted to intentionally design a truck that was rigid and strong, that you wouldn't have to worry about paint scratches or dents or ruining the look over time. Which I think makes a lot of sense. In fact, I would appreciate that more on a sedan or a SUV. I don't need it to look pretty. I don't need it to have paint. Actually, I find it beautiful when I realize why they did it. Helps keep manufacturing simple, helps you get better range and better efficiency by being more aerodynamic, and it's more durable. Those are all beneficial to the consumer. The only problem that people have with it is, yeah, but it looks kind of weird. It's like, that's your own personal preference. That's a subjective problem. That's not an objective problem. Aptera needs to look the way it does, not because it's a weird, personal, quirky style. Like, we just want to look funny. Like, Aptera is designed the way it is because that's the only way you can get an electric vehicle to 100 watt hours per mile, which is their whole key to efficiency, is being extremely aerodynamic and using a fraction of the power that a normal electric vehicle uses. And that's when solar on cars start to make sense. So because the Aptera is so aerodynamic and it has 3 wheels because there's less rolling resistance if you only have 3 tires instead of 4, less energy loss. If you can get to 100 watt hours per mile, you can cover the vehicle in solar cells and get like 30 to 40 miles of range added back into the vehicle for free just from sunlight. That's only possible when you design the vehicle in that way. There's no other way to design it and get that much range back. It has to look the way it does. It's not because we felt like designing it weird. I don't like weird designs for the sake of being weird. If it has a purpose and a beneficial reason to looking that way, even if that is it is cheaper to manufacture, I'm for it. But the white bezels didn't help with that at all. That was just a weird design choice. Um, let's say you said it complicates production to have touch bar at checkout, but at checkout there's currently an option to choose an ANSI or ISO keyboard. They require different cutouts and keyboard metal plate. Yeah, but they probably have to do that anyway. Um, just because it's already complicated doesn't mean that Apple should further complicate it. That's just cutting out metal differently. It's not, we need to order these entire OLED supplies. We need to order complete, very awkward sized displays, the touch bar. It's an OLED screen, but it's super long and super short. I don't think there was many of those displays being manufactured. That's not off the shelf supply chains. So that's far more expensive than just cutting out metal and plastic a little bit differently at the manufacturing mill. I know that the Mac, look at all the bend options and the non-bend options between Mac. It's already complicated. I don't think you can just say, well, because it's already complicated, they should make it even more complicated. Like, I think the touch bar was a pretty pricey thing, to be honest. OLED displays are not cheap. That's one of the reasons iPhones have gotten so expensive, is because they all have OLED panels now. Um, let's see. I would buy a Cybertruck if it had the money, if it looks efficient and has some pretty good cargo capacity. I think it'll probably beat F-150 Lightning in bed size. At least it was targeted to. It would be appreciated for them to be highly eco-friendly while being as affordable for the masses as possible. Scalability for the environment is important today. That's why I love Aptera so much. That's why my next EV isn't going to be a Tesla. I'm targeting, hopefully, if they make it to market. They're still in startup mode, so they haven't delivered a product yet, so there's a chance they could go bankrupt. I hope they don't, but that's the reason I'm so pumped for the Aptera, is because they have such an emphasis on not just being eco-friendly and super efficient, but also being affordable. They're basically undercutting everybody else in the EV space, especially when you factor in cost of ownership, which you have to with vehicles, because no one just buys cars and never drives them, or very few people do. If you factor in like 5-year ownership cost of the Aptera, there's no cheaper vehicle. Like, at least if we're talking vehicles, new vehicles that, are enclosed. I'm not counting like motorcycles or bikes or stuff like that. I'm talking like enclosed vehicles that you can drive in the rain, that have HVAC systems with air conditioning, that you can sit and have a seat belt and steer. As far as like that type of vehicle goes, I don't think there will be anything cheaper than the Aptera. What is the funniest, stupidest leak you remember reading that was so far out there and never came true? Oh, that's a good question, Hasael. There's a lot of good ones. I think the Apple glasses one was the funniest. Like, there's some funnier ones out there. I remember back in 2020, there was a rumor that the iPhone 12 was not going to have a notch or a camera hole. It was just, they figured out a way to fit Face ID in the bezel. It wasn't underneath the display. They had just found a way to miniaturize the true depth camera system to be as thin as the side bezel is all the way around the edge of the phone, and there would just be no cutout at all. And everyone was like, this is the rumored prototype of the iPhone 12. And I was like, what? Like, no. Have you guys seen how big the true depth camera system is? You're saying in 1 year they're just going to suddenly reduce the size of it by like 10? Like, no, it made no sense. That one was pretty funny. The Apple glasses one was funny too, because I think John Prosser was the one claiming that they were going to cost $500 and come out in the spring of 2021. And I was like, what? And he didn't say it was a headset, not mixed reality, not VR, but straight up glasses with, that were fashionable, that were stylish, that would display things on top of your vision with, hand tracking and all that for $500. And I was like, Apple's charging, $600 for the iPad Air, but you're telling me the hologram glasses are going to be $500? I just, none of that made sense at all from the beginning. I was like, there's no way that's $500. I would have been shocked if Apple glasses was $500. Their logic was just like, well, Apple needs it to be popular, right? But that's another one of the classic examples of like, okay, I don't know if John was faking it or if he was told by a source that was faking it, but clearly that didn't even remotely come true. I don't even think that was a little bit truthful. Um, but like, that's another situation where whoever was making it up, I don't know who was, but whoever was making it up was clearly going for, if it's good news, it'll sell well. You know, like the story will get a lot of traction, get a lot of attention if it sounds too good, if it sounds really cool. Like Apple's about to drop their next big category and it's only $500, and you know, that turning it into a bigger deal. And it's like, yeah, no, that wasn't that, there was no chance of that in my view. The current VR headset rumors are pretty hilarious. I agree. I still have the information was dropping this report about how the battery life of the mixed reality headset was 2 hours. So to get it to last longer, there were going to be battery packs that attached to your belt, and then you'd have a cable going from your battery packs to your headset, and then you would need to use AirPods Pro 2 for them to work. No, COVID didn't kill the 120 hertz iPhone 12. That was China was mostly back open by that point. The display suppliers weren't ready to deliver LTPO panels at that point. That's why I made the video admitting it before people later, I think it was John again, came forward and said, "Oh, don't give up hope on the 120 hertz iPhone 12. It might not happen." I was like, no, there's supply chain analysts. I think it was Ross Young. This was one of the first times I started following Ross. He was like, yeah, no, that you need an LTPO panel to do 120 hertz. At least if Apple does 120 hertz, that's how they do it. And they were like, the current suppliers they're buying from, they cannot supply that at high enough volume to do to do pro iPhones at ProMotion. He was like, no, that's just not happening. I can say with confidence it's not possible. They don't have the hardware for it. So I did a video saying no 120 hertz on iPhone 12 Pro. And that's when everyone was telling me, no, Drew, did you hear what so-and-so said? It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And I was like, I don't think so. You want to trust some YouTuber? Or do you want to trust the supply chain analyst? I'm going to trust the supply chain analyst. But yeah, it's like there's certain things that you buy in that much volume that you can't really keep a secret. When you're ordering tens of millions of something, it's not that quiet. Am I upgrading to iPhone 15 this year? I don't think so, but I'm willing to be surprised. If Apple comes out with something in September that's really compelling that I think I need, maybe I'll upgrade. But at this point, I don't think I'll need to. Flat-edged Apple Watch was the funniest Apple rumor just because so many were so sure about it. I know. That was the funny one too, yeah. I was actually glad that ended up being wrong, though, because I really liked the Series 7. Oh, yeah, iPad Pro on a stick rumor. That hurt. It wasn't ridiculous, but it hurt that it wasn't that. Remember when the iPhone 14 was leaked right before the 13 and was going to be amazing and incredible and have no cutout and circular volume buttons and no camera bump, too, right? Remember that? Yeah, that was fun. But I guess we'll have to wait. Hopefully in less than 12, at least less than 13 hours or so, we'll know for sure. In the words of James, I voted when I did the community post earlier. I said, do you guys think we'll get a refresh tomorrow? And he said, I'll give you my answer by Wednesday. I trust James will be 100% right in his prediction that he gives after. That supply chain mass production thing is probably why we knew about iPhone 10 a year in advance. Oh, yeah. No, for sure. No, we definitely knew. But I got to get going now. But I appreciate the super chats and the channel members. You guys are awesome and very generous. I'm so grateful for you all. The poll with over 800 votes, wow, said 55% thinks that Apple will refresh the MacBook Pros and Mac Mini tomorrow. So that's it, you guys. The poll is decided. Either 45% or 55% of you voted wrong. What's it going to be, huh? Let's just wait and see. Anyway, will you stream or make a video if they release? Yeah, I'll do something. I'll probably make a video. But stay tuned, and I'll see you all later. Have a good one. Bye-bye.